Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. I've been getting a lot of fan mail lately, and I want you to know that I am ecstatic about it. It's so nice to get feedback from people who like the podcast. It truly makes my day when people reach out. So to those of you who have done so, thank you very much. I got a few DMs on the Good Lawyers Gone Bad Facebook page, some messages on Instagram, and a bunch of messages through the website as well. And as everyone will tell you, I respond to all of them. I'm super grateful when people comment. Hearing from you guys really gives me the motivation to keep writing these stories. And I need that motivation because it's a lot of work. Today, we get to the story of the lawyer who had something to do with that 737 MAX disaster. You might remember when I introduced the episode about the plane crashes a few weeks ago, I said that I came upon that story because I was researching a lawyer who did some ridiculous things, and it turned out that he worked on that 737 MAX case. I told you that I decided to tell the 737 MAX story first because it was truly an incredible story in its own right, and I'd follow up with the lawyer story later. Well, that time has come. Now, you don't need to listen to the 737 MAX episode to understand this story, and you don't need to listen to it to appreciate the craziness of this lawyer. It's not like this is a true part 2 in that regard. So if you don't want to go back and listen to the 737 story, you don't have to. However, if you listen to the 737 MAX episode first, you'll sort of be primed for this story, and I think it just might make it gooder. Before I get to the episode, I want to make you feel guilty. I know that a lot of you have been listening to me for a while, and I know you're liking the stories. Go rate the podcast. You know what? Do it now. Put me on pause in a second when I tell you, and go click the 5 stars. You don't want to write a review? Fine. We're all busy. But click on 5 stars. Go do it now. I'm going to say pause. Ready? Pause. You're back? You did it? Thank you. Okay, today's program is the follow-up to the 737 MAX disaster, The Real Housewife and the Real Crook. On Sunday, October 28th, 2018, Rabi Gaharu woke up on the tropical island of Bali. It was a gorgeous 80-degree day. That's about 27 degrees Celsius. The sun was shining, the water was clear. It was quite simply another day in paradise. Robbie probably enjoyed the sun and the sand that day because he knew he was leaving that evening. He was booked on Lion Air Flight 43, and it was scheduled to take off from Bali at 11 p.m. that night and head over to Jakarta. Robbie was a frequent flyer, so he probably wasn't too surprised when the flight was delayed for 2 hours. No one knew why it was delayed. It could have been a late crew. It could have been maintenance issues. Whatever it was, when he got on board the aircraft, he thought that things looked normal. Soon, the plane was taxiing to the runway, the engines fired up, and they had liftoff. But as the plane climbed, frequent flyer Rabi Gaharu could tell that something was wrong. The plane felt as if it was struggling to ascend. It was sluggish, almost laboring through the air. Robbie thought that it must have been turbulence. There was really no other way to figure it. The plane felt as though it was struggling to get up to speed. And then, 10 minutes after takeoff, the plane nosedived to the ground. People panicked. It felt like the aircraft was falling into a really deep hole. Passengers screamed, some started praying. The aircraft dropped 400 feet, and then, miraculously, it came to level. The pilots got hold of the airplane, brought it to proper altitude, and then they had a decision to make. Do they turn back and return to the Bali airport that they just left, or do they continue on the 2-hour trip to Jakarta? They decided to continue on, and that made sense. Sure, the Jakarta airport was much farther away, but that airport was the country's hub, so they must have thought that the maintenance facilities would be much better there. The passengers on Lion Air Flight 43 were on pins and needles for the rest of the trip. The seatbelt light stayed on during the rest of the way, and at one point Rabi Gaharu saw the pilot come out of the cockpit holding a thick book. Robbie could see the 2 crew members conferring over what was probably the plane's manual. It must have been a strange sight for Robbie. After all, they were flying Lion Air's newest and most modern aircraft. The Boeing 737 MAX 8 that they were in was the flagship of the fleet. It had less than 900 miles on it. When the flight eventually made it to Jakarta, the pilot reported a problem with the aircraft's instruments. No one knows why the plane was given clearance to fly the next day, but it was. And that was a mistake, because the next flight would be its last. The next day, Lion Air Flight 610 would crash shortly after takeoff from Jakarta Airport, killing all 189 souls on board. Airline disasters seem to be the type of events that shake us all to the core. We're all a little scared to fly to begin with, right? Even those of us who do it all the time, we're still a little apprehensive. I mean, screaming through the air 6 miles above the earth in a metal tube just doesn't seem smart. But we all do it because we know that the chance of anything happening is quite low. So when something does happen, we all let out a collective gasp. Well, not all of us. There are a significant number of lawyers who don't so much gasp with horror as much as giggle with excitement. Okay, that's a bit cold. Let's just say those lawyers are eager. And that's because air disasters can be big money for plaintiffs' lawyers. I don't know how many of you read my book about the crash and burn of lawyer F. Lee Bailey. You can buy it on Amazon. F. Lee Bailey loved airline disaster cases because they were lucrative. When I interviewed him, he told me that if you could show that the victims of an air disaster were in distress before they died, the surviving family members could have a pretty nice wrongful death case. And lawyers benefit greatly from that because they get paid a contingency fee. When someone is a plaintiff's lawyer, that's what we call lawyers who represent the victims and their families, the plaintiffs. They're part of the plaintiff's bar. When someone is a plaintiff's lawyer, they get paid a percentage of what they win. So if someone gets a $50 million award, a lawyer can make 40% of that, or $20 million. That's a heck of a payday. Now, I know I made that sound sort of sleazy, but that's just because of my New Jersey presentation style. The truth is, wrongful death cases in air crashes and the lawyers who make big money off of those cases actually serve an important societal purpose. First, think about the big paydays that victims get. The truth is, the big wealthy airlines are only going to make a commitment to improving safety if there are financial consequences when they fail to do so. Those big financial awards that are given to victims, well, they punish the airlines and plane manufacturers, and that financial punishment gives them the motivation to keep the sky safe. The system is saying to those companies, you want to avoid a billion-dollar judgment that threatens the existence of your business? Make safer planes. It works. Second, what about the big paydays to those lawyers? Those fee agreements are actually very necessary. Bringing those lawsuits cost money. Lawyers cost money, experts cost money, and pretty much everything else that needs to be done to pursue one of those cases costs a fortune. I don't mean that theoretically. You actually have to put gobs of cash out of your pocket to get those cases done. And what happens if you lose? All that money was spent for nothing. Well, most of the families of airline disaster victims don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars lying around for that purpose. So if they were forced to pay for those expenses, no one would ever bring those suits, and the airlines would never feel the pain of the punitive damages that coerce them into making things safer. Enter the lawyer's contingency fee. Letting a lawyer get paid by taking a cut of the winnings actually provides access to justice. It allows clients to have their day in court when they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to do so. Instead of forcing the victim's family to pay for everything, we ask the lawyer to do it. Lawyers put up the hundreds of thousands of dollars of expenses out of their own pockets. The lawyers work on the cases without getting any fee at all while the case is going on. The lawyer takes the risk of not getting paid if the case loses. And in return for taking that risk, putting up the money, and putting in the time, they get a chance to take a healthy percentage of the award when the case settles or goes to trial. That also explains why plaintiffs' lawyers tend to take cases that they know are going to win. And the cases that are usually a slam dunk are airline disasters. Tom Girardi of the law firm Girardi Keese, located in Los Angeles, California, was one of those aviation lawyers. That's not really accurate. He wasn't one of those aviation lawyers. Tom Girardi was the biggest, most well-known, and powerful plaintiff's lawyer in the state of California. And that made him one of the biggest plaintiff's lawyers in the country, maybe even the world. Tom Girardi was born in the late 1930s in Denver, Colorado. He was the son of an Air Force veteran. His family moved to the Los Angeles area when Girardi was very young, and he grew up in the Westchester neighborhood, which was a predominantly blue-collar community. In school, however, Tom Girardi was exposed to the rich kids, and that made an impression. Girardi saw the things that they had, the fancy clothes, the cars, the trinkets, and he decided that he wanted that too. The question he asked himself was, how do I get there? The answer came through the television screen. Tom Girardi was amazed by the exploits of the famous 1950s TV character, lawyer Perry Mason. Perry Mason was cool, calm, powerful, and in that character, Tom Girardi saw his ticket to status, power, and riches. Tom Girardi made it his mission to follow in the footsteps of his TV hero Perry Mason and practice law. There was one problem. This was the era of the Vietnam War, which meant that Girardi could be shipped overseas. In the early 1960s, men between 18 and 25 years old were subject to the draft. Girardi was in that age bracket, and he didn't want to go. Aside from the obvious concern about dying in war, Girardi also knew that being a grunt in the jungle was not the route to wealth. So Girardi got out of Vietnam by going to college. At the outbreak of the Vietnam War, men between 18 and 25 could get a deferment for post-secondary education. That meant that they didn't have to enter the draft. College students and graduate students were given draft status 2S, which meant that they couldn't be forced to serve. That worked out perfectly for Tom Girardi. He took advantage of the 2S status, went to college and then law school, and graduated from Loyola Law School in Los Angeles in 1964. The only problem was the timing was a bit off. When Girardi graduated in 1964, he was 25 years old. He was therefore still in his last year of eligibility for the draft. So when Tom finished Loyola, his student deferment ended. That meant his draft board would reclassify him 1A and draft him into the military. If only there was a way for Tom Girardi to extend his educational deferment for one more year. If he could do that, he'd be 26 when he finished school, and he'd age out of the draft. Lucky for Tom, he had an option. During those early years of the war, there was an additional educational deferment available. Men who finished a bachelor's degree before age 25 could apply for a graduate deferment. Your educational deferment would be extended if you enrolled in a recognized graduate program. Back then, the law degree was considered a college degree. So Tom Girardi enrolled in a one-year master's. He went to NYU and got his LLM, which is a master's in law. When he graduated a year later, he was 26 and no longer draft eligible. That's when he returned to Los Angeles and opened up a law office. In 1965, Tom started a firm with a friend of his that they called Girardi Keese. Tom Girardi started his practice by being scrappy. He survived off personal injury cases that were referred by people he knew. His partner, the Keese of Girardi Keese, well, that guy left the firm pretty early, but Tom kept both names on the masthead. Personally, I think Tom Girardi wanted it that way. Girardi wanted to be flexible. He wanted to be able to make his own decisions. He wanted to be able to choose which cases to take, which cases he wouldn't take, and generally he wanted control over his own fate. And things worked out for him from the jump. Tom Girardi immediately started his trek up the mountain towards success, and he was moving fast. One of the reasons he shot up so quickly was because he entered the legal world at the perfect time. Do you remember my previous episode, the one about David Spaulding and his injuries in the car accident? Remember how I said that back in the late 1950s and early 1960s, getting multi-million-dollar judgments just wasn't the thing? In part, that was because the amount a person could collect for their injuries was capped by law. Well, by the mid-1960s, that was changing. States were removing the limitations on how much a plaintiff could recover in a personal injury case. And the changes to those laws were occurring at the exact time that Tom Girardi was getting into the practice of law. He was perfectly positioned to capitalize on it. And that's exactly what he did. Tom Girardi became a pioneer in the world of big money legal awards. He's the first lawyer in California to get a medical malpractice judgment of over $1 million. While Girardi's professional life was certainly meeting expectations, it seemed that his personal life was not. Girardi got married not long after opening his law office, and they had a few kids. They stayed married for 20 years, but eventually separated and got divorced. Girardi got married again, but he got divorced pretty quickly. When you look at his life at that time, it almost seems as if he was searching for things that would make him feel fulfilled. He was searching for the right personal relationship. His first 2 wives clearly didn't have what he was looking for, whatever that might be. Professionally, he was searching as well. He was growing a successful practice, but he was looking for the perfect case, the one that would take him to a greater level of success. He didn't know where the personal satisfaction would come from. He didn't know where the professional success would come from. But the one thing he did know was that he had the drive to keep searching. And over the next few years, that persistence would pay off on both fronts. In 1882, a guy named D.C. Henderson started a settlement deep in the Mojave Desert. He named it after his son, Hinckley. Less than a decade later, the small outpost would be expanded. The Southern Pacific and Santa Fe Railroads set up a railroad depot in Hinckley, and it wasn't long before settlers started showing up in the Mojave for mining and ranching. But in the 1950s, things really changed for Hinckley. In the 1950s, California was expanding big time. Millions of people were moving into the area, and that meant that the state of California needed to build infrastructure and bring in utilities like water and natural gas. Well, how do you get natural gas to an area? You build a pipeline. That's when the state's utility company got to work. An affiliate of the Pacific Electric and Gas Company, known by its initials PG&E, built a massive pipeline system that started in Alberta, Canada, and ran 1,400 miles through 6 states and provinces and brought gas to Central California. But you can't just build a pipe, put gas in it, and expect it to flow 1,400 miles. Natural gas loses pressure as it travels through a pipeline, so it has to be recompressed every few hundred miles. So PG&E needed to build a compression station somewhere, and in 1952 they decided that that somewhere would be Hinckley, California. Now, of course, there were some technical issues they had to deal with, one of which was heat. That's the heat of the compressors. Compressors generate enormous heat, and they therefore need to be cooled. You cool things with water, of course, but water-based cooling systems tend to corrode. They rust. So PG&E did what industrial plants across America were doing at the time. They put a chemical called hexavalent chromium into the cooling water to prevent rust. The name of that chemical was chromium-6. It was cheap, effective, and profoundly toxic. The chromium-6 treated water went into cooling towers, cooled the compressors, and when they were done with it, they put it into ponds. Unlined ponds. These were basically just holes that were dug into the earth next to the cooling station. For 14 years, 370 million gallons of chromium-tainted wastewater soaked directly into the ground beneath Hinckley, California. It went down into the aquifer and into the water table. And from there, it went into the wells the families of Hinckley were drinking from every single day. PG&E stopped using the chemical in 1966, but they never told anybody about the water contamination. Starting in the late 1980s, residents there began noticing something wrong. People were getting sick with horrible ailments. The town became a cluster for all sorts of mystery illnesses, and it didn't make any sense. By 1993, the people of Hinckley had enough, and the residents began filing complaints. But they were having a tough time gathering evidence, and they had no one to champion their cause in the legal world. That was until a short-skirt-wearing legal clerk from a law firm in Thousand Oaks, California, came into the picture. Erin Brockovich worked for a small firm called Macery and Vitito, and she started knocking on doors in Hinckley, California. What she found was staggering. Cancers, tumors, miscarriages, chronic nosebleeds. An entire community was slowly being poisoned by water they'd been drinking for decades. Water that PG&E had known for years was contaminated, yet said nothing. Brockovich pursued the case tenaciously. She was a legal clerk with no law degree, but she built a plaintiff's class by knocking on one door at a time. With her help and the help of her firm, approximately 650 plaintiffs claimed that PG&E had failed to warn them adequately of the health risks associated with the chromium-6 from their compressor plant. The lead attorney was Ed Macery from Erin Brockovich's law firm. His co-counsel was a guy named Tom Girardi. The case was exactly what Tom Girardi had been searching for. It was the opportunity he could use to catapult him into the upper echelon of the legal world. The lawsuit that followed didn't go to a jury. It went to private arbitration. And when the arbitrators ruled in favor of the first group of plaintiffs that presented their case, PG&E did the math and folded. On July 2, 1996, PG&E agreed to pay $333 million. At the time, it was the largest settlement ever paid in a direct action lawsuit in American history. 4 years later, Hollywood turned the story into a film. Julia Roberts won the Oscar, and the man who was co-counsel in the case became the most famous plaintiff's attorney in California. His name was attached to the biggest environmental settlement in American history. He was the man who took on PG&E and won. The champion of the little guy. The guy you called when you had nothing and your enemy had everything. He once said in an interview with a professional association that was honoring him, "All of a sudden, I was part of a very public win that a lot of people understood. It put me in a category that said, hey, you know, this guy can handle the big cases." Girardi took that notoriety and built it into legend. And that carefully constructed reputation made him very dangerous. Not just to insurance companies, not just to his adversaries, but to his clients as well. Because when you are a legend, when people trust you simply because of who you are, nobody looks too closely. Nobody asks hard questions. Nobody imagines that the champion of the little guy is the one you need to be afraid of. The hole in Tom's professional life had been filled. It was filled with wealth and celebrity. Next was the hole in his personal life, and that was filled by someone he met at a restaurant. Tom Girardi loved to go to hot restaurants and rub elbows with wealthy and important people. He once told a story. He said, "I was having dinner with President Clinton, just the two of us at Giorgio Baldi's. Tom Hanks was there. Steven Spielberg was there. It's a real hangout. So I'm having dinner with Clinton, and in walks Julia Roberts. I stood up and she said, 'Tom!' and I gave her a big hug. I said to her, 'Julia, I'm with President Clinton.' She came back to chat with Clinton for a minute and then went back to her table. I looked over at Clinton and I said, 'You know, this happens to me all the time.'" Yes, Tom Girardi loved to hang out at those popular restaurants. And the hole in his personal life would be filled at a different restaurant Chazin's. Chazin was a Los Angeles institution. It was opened in 1936 and it was located on the border of Beverly Hills and West Hollywood. For decades, Chazin's was the place to be and be seen. It was the place where movie stars, studio heads, politicians, and old guard Hollywood royalty all held court. And one of its cocktail waitresses was a young single mom named Erica Cahoy. Erica Cahoy was always a performer. As a child, she did plays and commercials. As a teenager, she was doing dance recitals. She had dreams of making it big as a performer, and that's why she left her home in Atlanta, Georgia, as soon as she could. At 18 years old, she moved to New York City. She said, "I was a middle-class kid from Atlanta. I had big dreams, and I wanted to make them happen." To pay the bills, Erica worked as a go-go dancer in New Jersey in the early 90s before landing some small acting roles. If you believe the internet, she had the distinction of being the first dead person ever seen on Law & Order. Erica met her first husband when she was DJing at a club and they had a son. The marriage didn't work out, however, and when they broke up, she moved out to Los Angeles. In L.A., Erica made ends meet by working as a cocktail waitress at Chazin's. Erica remembered the first time she met lawyer Tom Girardi at the restaurant. "He was very kind," she recalled. "He was great. Everybody loved Tom. He was a good customer, and he was a good tipper." After knowing each other for about a year, Tom eventually asked Erica for her phone number. She gave it to him around Christmas time one year, and his response was very romantic. He had his secretary call Erica a few days later to see if she could meet him for dinner. Erica didn't bite. She told Tom's assistant, "No, I cannot make it, and if Mr. Girardi wants to take me out, he can call me himself." About a week later, Tom went into the restaurant and asked out Erica personally. From there, their relationship blossomed. Erica explained, "We were never really apart after that." The couple married about a year later in 2000. There was a 33-year age difference between the two of them. He was 61 and she was 29. What could possibly have attracted them to one another? Well, she was young and beautiful. He was established and wealthy. It was a match made in Hollywood. Shortly after claiming a prize in his personal life, Girardi was awarded the ultimate prize in his professional life. Tom Girardi was inducted into the Trial Lawyer Hall of Fame by the California State Bar. Girardi was now the king of the California bar, and Erica was his queen. For the next 10 years, Tom and Erica lived a lavish life of bottomless money. They had every type of toy, went on every type of vacation, bought every type of clothing. There was absolutely no restriction whatsoever on their spending. And it was all being funded by his awesome law practice. In fact, at times, Erica didn't even know how much she was spending. The bill for her American Express card was sent straight to the law office. She never even saw it. The people at the office just paid it every month. The expenses really started to mount, however, in 2007, because that's when Erica Girardi felt the need to go back into performing. Erica Girardi adopted the stage name Erica Jane, and she decided to go into the recording studio to make music. Well, recording and producing music cost money, so Tom's law practice funded Erica's music career as well. Erica released her debut single, Roller Coaster, that was produced and co-written by a team that worked with Madonna, Britney Spears, and Cher. That had to cost his law practice a pretty penny, no? Erica's single went to #1 on Billboard's Hot Dance Club Play chart. After that, 9 #1 dance singles followed. She had a unique sound. The LA Times described her style as someone who doesn't sing so much as purrs. The amount of money these two were burning through was astronomical. At one point, Erica claimed that she was spending as much as $40,000 a month on clothes and makeup. Tom threw his money around as well. He had a standing daily reservation for an exclusive table at Morton's Steakhouse in Los Angeles, and the pair also allegedly owned 2 private jets in addition to multiple homes. Now, you got to have a lot of clients to generate enough fees to pay those bills. That is why Tom Girardi set up a system that fed him big money clients on the regular. Tom Girardi employed a network of consultants that both brought in business and made his existing business run, shall we say, smoothly. Some individuals were tasked with finding victims of devastating accidents and sending them to the firm. Those people were apparently paid to direct those clients to the Girardi firm. In some instances, he had consultants whose job was not so clear, but they were apparently taken care of nonetheless. Sometimes he gave them cash payouts. Other times they were given vacation packages. Those arrangements were all alleged in legal documents. And if they were true, then the arrangements would have mostly been illegal. That's probably why some of these consultants raised a few eyebrows around the office. People who were known consultants would come in to meet with Girardi, have a long conversation behind closed doors, and then leave quietly. But people saw. People recognized the individuals coming in for those meetings. But everyone in the law office kept quiet about it. But there's only so much in fees that even the most diligent and active consultants can bring in. And when you have a lawyer and his wife who are spending so much money, things are bound to get difficult. And that's why in 2010, it appeared that Tom Girardi was nearing his financial limit. He needed to do something drastic. Joseph Ruigomez and his girlfriend Jessica were home watching football. It was the opening week of the season, so they were excited. Football season is a joy for certain fans, and Joseph Ruigomez was among them. He was planted in his living room in front of his TV. If you left Joseph's house and walked along the sidewalk next to the tall trees that lined the street, you'd come to the home of Joseph's next-door neighbors, Mike and Tammy Zapata. Mike, Tammy, and their daughter Amanda were enjoying a lazy day as well. Amanda was watching TV and Tammy was in the kitchen cooking. But in a split second, all of their lives would change. A massive explosion rocked the entire block. The noise was so loud that Tammy remembered it being deafening. Immediately after the blast, she looked at her husband and daughter. She could see them, but she couldn't hear a thing. She looked out the kitchen window, and all she could see was a wall of flames as high as the street trees along the sidewalk. Tammy's husband grabbed their daughter up off the couch, and the three tried to run out of the house, but they literally couldn't get out of it. It wasn't so much the flames outside blocking their exit, but something was actually pulling them back into the house. Tammy described it as feeling as though you're running in quicksand. As hard as they tried to run out, the house, it seemed, was sucking them back in. What they didn't know at the time is that the San Bruno pipeline, which ran right under their house, had just exploded. Joints in that pipeline were improperly welded in 1956, and 54 years later, the joints finally gave way and sent her entire block up in flames. Tammy and her family managed to get out of the house and ran down the walkway in front of their home, and when they got to the end, what they found was horrifying. It was their neighbor, Joseph Ruigomez. Tammy explained what she saw to NPR. She said, "When we got down the walkway, Joe came running up. He had no skin. It looked like he had a shredded T-shirt, but it was his skin all melted off him. His face was all white. You could hardly see his features. In fact, he still had smoke coming off his entire body." Tammy and her husband threw Joe into their car and rushed him to the hospital. She remembered, That was like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. I ran stop signs, stoplights. I made left turns through red lights. But I'm telling you, God drove because everyone parted waters for us to get him there. While 38 homes were destroyed in the San Bruno pipeline explosion, it seemed that Joseph Ruigomez's home was hit the worst. Joe's girlfriend was killed in the blast. And while he lived, he suffered burns over 90% of his body. He was in a coma for 2 months. When he woke up, Joseph and his family hired Tom Girardi to represent him in his lawsuit for injuries. Why Tom Girardi? Well, he was the king of the plaintiff's bar. But it also probably didn't hurt that the defendant in this case would once again be PG&E, the same company that Girardi helped beat up in that Erin Brockovich case. So going with the firm Girardi-Keese, it was a no-brainer. At the time that Tom Girardi took on Joseph Ruigomez as a client, the lawyer was starting to feel the financial pinch at home. He and his wife were spending money hand over fist, and it was starting to affect him. Plus, his clients were getting angry too. There were grumblings about clients who had cases settled by Girardi, but were unhappy with how he was dealing with the distribution of their funds. But so far, that just appeared to be grumbling and nothing more. There weren't any bar disciplinary cases to speak of. A search of his law license would have revealed nothing. No blemishes at all. Girardi, however, was indeed having a tough time paying his bills. That's why in 2011, he borrowed $3.5 million from a company called California Attorney Lending II. We'll call them by their initials, CAL. Of course, you can't get a loan without collateral, so the Girardi law firm put up the future fees they were expected to collect as collateral for that loan. That influx of capital was welcomed, but not enough. Girardi needed more to close the gaping hole left in his law firm's finances caused by the lavish spending of both he and his wife. But luckily for Tom, he was about to have a payday. In January of 2013, the pipeline explosion case of Joseph Ruigomez went to mediation. Soon thereafter, Girardi gave his client the good news. The case was settled. Girardi told Joe Ruigomez that the settlement would be $5 million paid up front, with another $78 million to be paid out over the next 60 years in monthly installments of $40,000 apiece. Tom Girardi told his client it was a good deal. He presented the settlement agreement to Joe and told him to sign. When Joe tried to talk about whether there were any other options, Girardi told him that there weren't. This deal, the lawyer explained, was the only hope of settling the case. Girardi put the settlement agreement in front of his client and told him to sign. Joe remembers that he never had a chance to actually read the document, but he signed it anyway. If the king of the California bar tells you to do something, I guess you do it. Well, if Joe had read that agreement, he would have been very confused. And that's because the deal his lawyer sold him was not the deal that PG&E had agreed to. PG&E had not settled for $5 million plus a multi-year payout. PG&E agreed to pay Joseph Ruigomez $53 million in a lump sum. And they did. But Joe Ruigomez never got it. That money went into Tom Girardi's trust account. Instead of giving Joe Ruigomez the money PG&E paid to him, Girardi took that money, paid off his personal bills, then used the balance of the money to pay off Ruigomez over time. That's why Girardi represented the deal as a smallish amount up front and a long payout over time. Now you might be thinking, $53 million is a lot of money. Couldn't Girardi have given him more than just $5 million at the outset? The answer is no. Because Tom Girardi didn't just need the money to pay off his personal bills, Tom Girardi also needed that money to pay off the other clients he'd been stealing from. Yeah, Girardi ran a similar scam with other clients. There was the client who sued a drug company for a hormone replacement therapy gone wrong. a former Lockheed employee who was exposed to chemicals. Client after client, all of the settlements and winnings for his clients' cases were going into the firm trust account. He was giving some of the money to the clients and then telling them that the balance of their settlement would be paid over time. And then he just took their money from his trust account and used it on himself. Every case he settled, it seemed, was used to pay his personal debts and also the amounts owed to other clients who'd been promised payouts over time. Tom Girardi had turned his law office into a Ponzi scheme. By the way, if you didn't think that it was bad enough that he lied to Joseph Ruigomez about the actual settlement, consider this. Remember how he said he was supposed to get $5 million up front and then the balance over time? Well, Girardi didn't even give him the first $5 million. After the settlement documents were all signed up, Girardi got a little cute. The initial $5 million, he explained, would not be given to Joe as a lump sum after all. Instead, that money would be placed in his firm's account, and he would occasionally make interest payments to Joe. It made no sense. And the payments that Joe Ruigomez would get from the lawyer also made no sense. He received sporadic payments for strange amounts, $54,000 here, $27,000 there, and then out of nowhere, $100,000. It was almost like if Girardi had some money come into his pocket, he'd pay it out a little bit at a time. When Joe got those haphazard payments, he questioned his lawyer, but instead of getting a straight answer, the client got the runaround. First, Girardi told him that the law firm had to pay off various medical debts that Ruigomez incurred while recovering. Then Girardi began to blame a retired judge who supervised the mediation process. The judge, Girardi said, had to sign off on everything. He even told Joe that the judge doesn't like to give a young man a lot of money. Starting in around 2010, Tom Girardi was robbing from Peter to pay Paul. And the fund that he used to make all of those payments was his lawyer trust account. The famous Greek philosopher Seneca the Younger once uttered my favorite saying of all time. He said, "Luck is where preparation meets opportunity." I love that. If you prepare, then you will be able to seize the opportunities when they appear before you. Erika Jayne prepared. She made her name in the music industry. She played the role of high-spending spouse. So it was almost inevitable that all that preparation would provide her with an incredible opportunity. In 2015, the Real Housewives franchise came calling. The Bravo reality show, The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, extended an invitation to Erika Jayne to join their cast. She was the perfect choice. She was a successful singer who was married to one of the most famous and wealthy lawyers in the country. Erika Jayne billed herself as a riddle wrapped in an enigma and cash. You can't get much more Real Housewivey than that. Erika Jayne made her debut on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills on November 3rd, 2015. At the time, however, neither she nor the producers of the show knew that the entire Girardi empire was in the process of crumbling. And it was worse than you could imagine. Tom Girardi was apparently running out of his client's money. And it couldn't come at a worse time. Tom was probably just excited about Erika's appearance on The Real Housewives. I mean, this is a guy who'd been consumed with being associated with the rich and famous. Now a television show was going to show the whole country what the state of California already knew, that Tom Girardi was the king. So when the financial pinch back at his law office started to feel more like a vice closing in, he did what he had to do to keep things going. That meant that Tom had to borrow. Tom had already borrowed millions from the lender CAL, but he burned through that money a long time ago. So the same month that Erika started on The Real Housewives, Tom went to CAL's competitor and borrowed from them. Tom went to an outfit called Law Finance Group, where he borrowed several more millions of dollars. But that loan had to be secured, right? They're not just going to give him a personal loan without any security. The problem was the only security he had was the value of his future uncollected legal fees, and those had already been pledged to CAL as collateral for the first loan. Well, that didn't seem to matter to Tom Girardi. He pledged those same fees to the new lender for this new loan and never told Law Finance Group that the fees were already encumbered. As soon as that money was loaned and funded, it was spent. But it wasn't enough. He needed more. So a few months later, Girardi got another loan from an Arizona lender named Stillwell Madison. That firm loaned Girardi another $6.5 million. And what did he put up as collateral? Those same uncollected legal fees. And once again, he never told the lender that the security was already pledged to someone else. Apparently, that additional $6.5 million was also not enough. So a few days later, he increased the Law Finance Group loan to $15 million. And a few months after that, he borrowed another $9 million from yet another lender, this time one out of Texas named Virage Funding. By 2018, the firm had taken on so much debt that they were repaying so many loans with interest, and they could no longer pay their debts when they came due. Meanwhile, to the outside world, Tom Girardi was the king of the bar. Governor Gavin Newsom in California recently gave Girardi the coveted job of making the decision of who gets awarded judgeships statewide. The magazine Super Lawyers elected him as the #1 lawyer in the state of California. #1! Tom Girardi's power and prestige were at an all-time high. He was fooling everyone. But it was all a sham. It was all a sham, and Girardi couldn't let anyone see what was on the other side of the curtain. If people knew that he was drowning in debt, everything he worked for would have been destroyed. His position at the top of the legal food chain would be gone, and that fall from grace would be seen by a national audience, given his wife's prominence on the reality TV show. Tom Girardi had only one option. He had to keep pushing. He had to keep looking for clients so he could keep his practice and his life afloat. And the next source of income was indeed floating. It was the wreckage of an airplane floating in the waters of Indonesia. On October 18, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 crashed. The disaster was tailor-made for the Girardi-Keese law firm. But how do you end up connecting victims of a plane crash that occurred in Indonesia to a lawyer in Los Angeles? Well, you gotta know a guy who knows a guy. And that's why those consultants were so important. When Lion Air Flight 610 went down, Tom Girardi's army of consultants went into action. They steered several family members of the victims toward the firm, and eventually, those victims retained Girardi-Keese. The firm's clients would include several children who became orphans after the crash. The representation wasn't such a clean arrangement, though, because it couldn't be. Girardi couldn't just represent these people because of where everything occurred. The crash happened in Indonesia. At the time, the plane manufacturer, Boeing, had its headquarters in Chicago, so that meant that any lawsuit you were going to bring in the U.S. had to be brought in Illinois. But Tom Girardi was licensed in California. So Girardi had to get local counsel in Illinois to work alongside his firm as they sought relief for their clients. Girardi made a deal with a local Illinois law firm known as the Edelson Law Firm, and they acted as local counsel. When Tom Girardi started working on that Lion Air case, he was feeling enormous pressure to get it settled. He needed the money. His wife was still treating his law firm as a bottomless money pit because she didn't know that anything was wrong, and he didn't seem to be changing his lifestyle at all either. And oh, by the way, he still had a functioning law office that needed money for operations. Girardi needed to keep all those things going, but he had basically run out of cash. We know that because he started to default on those loans he took out. In January of 2019, Law Finance Group sued Girardi for defaulting on the millions of dollars in loans that they gave him. In May, Stillwell Madison sued him for defaulting on their loans. And it wasn't just the banks coming after Girardi. Joseph Ruigomez, the victim of the pipeline explosion, he seems to have found out what Girardi did with his settlement, so he sued to recoup the money he never got. Everyone was coming after Girardi, and he was now in panic mode. He went back to his original lender, CAL, and asked for more money. He had to find a way to pay some of these people off. This time, however, CAL wasn't buying it. Not initially, at least. CAL told Girardi that they found out that he took other loans and repledged the same collateral to those other lenders. But Tom Girardi didn't get to where he was by rolling over. He tried to talk his way out of it. He told CAL that most of those other loans were repaid, even though they weren't. What about the fact that he didn't have anything to secure the additional money he was looking for? He had an answer for that, too. He told them that he'd put up his Lion Air fee as additional collateral and that he had an outstanding matter that was going to settle for billions of dollars, which should net him a fee of $900 million. The bottom line, he said, was that CAL would be fully protected. Was it true? Who knows? But CAL bought it, and they gave him several more millions of dollars. CAL would later learn that when they advanced that additional money to Tom Girardi, the balance of his outstanding loans appears to have totaled $39 million. And his debt only got worse, because soon thereafter, pipeline blast victim Joseph Ruigomez got an $11 million judgment against Tom Girardi. Not only was Girardi's financial world collapsing, but his personal life was deteriorating as well. He and his wife Erica were fighting constantly. Was it over money? There's no way to know. But Tom Girardi clearly had a lot on his mind. We don't know if his financial problems were what was causing a rift in his marriage, but we do know that the couple was growing apart. Girardi did eventually settle the Lion Air case, but it wasn't as big a payday as he'd hoped. For a variety of reasons, including the difference in the standard of living between Indonesia and the United States, the amount he got for his clients was a relatively paltry $12.5 million. In March of 2020, those settlement funds were received by his office. As soon as they were deposited, they were gone. When his clients asked where the money was, he told them that he didn't get it yet. When they asked again, he stonewalled some more. The clients started to complain to that local Illinois counsel, the Edelson firm. The Edelson lawyers then put the pressure on Girardi. Where's the money, they wanted to know. Girardi stonewalled them, too. He said, we're working on the releases. There are issues with translators in Indonesia, so it's taking some time. The Edelson firm bought it. A little while later, those Illinois lawyers asked about the money again. Girardi told them part of the money was received, but none of it could be released to any of the clients until all of the settlement funds from Boeing was in his hands. That wasn't true, but it did the job, and the Edelson firm was held at bay again. Girardi also told the clients that part of the money was received. Okay, they said, so why haven't you sent anything to us? Girardi told them that there was a delay in sending the funds because of COVID. The virus had just hit, and he said that no one was in his office who could send the money out. It was garbage. They were all in the office at the time. But those lies bought him about another month. Girardi knew that he couldn't avoid paying his clients forever, so he finally told his associate to make partial payments to the client. But the associate balked. The money from the actual Lion Air settlement was gone. So Girardi told his associate to pay the clients from money that he was holding for other cases. The associate objected. He told Girardi that the court required that full payment be made to the client and that you couldn't take the money from other clients. Girardi snapped at his associate and said, "This is above your pay grade." It's probably not smart to get snippy with someone who is assisting you in the commission of a crime and had been doing so for years. There's a good chance that that person might act out, don't you think? The associate might have been angry, but he made the payments anyway. Partial payments were made to the clients, along with a letter claiming that there were tax issues of some sort that was affecting the release of the balance. After that, the associate quit. The associate never told the clients that it was all a lie, but on his way out the door, he made sure that the Edelson firm in Illinois knew. He told them, "You need to come after Tom Girardi." Lawyers from the Edelson firm then confronted one of the remaining associates at Girardi's office. Lots of them had quit by then, but that associate tried to give them the runaround too. The Edelson firm, though, was putting things together now. They fired off a super nasty letter to Girardi, and that was enough to at least get him on the phone. When they spoke, the Edelson lawyers reminded Girardi that each of the victims' families were still owed $500,000 apiece. The lawyers wanted it paid. Girardi promised to pay the clients in full by August 2nd of 2020. He didn't. Girardi didn't have the money to pay the Lion Air victims. He didn't have money to pay his own bills. In a desperate attempt to keep the lights on, Girardi reached out to his lender, CAL, one more time and asked for more money. He told them the firm has never been more successful. This time they didn't buy it. CAL sued Girardi and got a multi-million-dollar judgment in October of 2020. To add misery to misery, the next month, Tom's wife Erica filed for divorce. And to add even more misery to more misery, the Edelson firm in Illinois decided that they'd had enough too. They filed a motion with the court asking Tom Girardi to be held in contempt for failing to pay the Lion Air victims. They also sued both Tom and Erica, claiming that they embezzled money that should have been going to the victims of the Lion Air disaster and other clients. Once that suit was filed, Tom Girardi's lenders knew that they had to protect their interests, so they filed involuntary bankruptcy proceedings and forced the Girardi-Keese law firm into bankruptcy. And once a bankruptcy trustee was appointed, they would start to go through all of the sordid details. The Edelson firm had no idea the Pandora's box they'd opened at the time that they filed that lawsuit. One of the things you might be thinking is, how the hell did Tom Girardi get away with this? All the clients getting screwed by the lawyer and no one reported him? And you should know that I didn't even include all of the clients he screwed because the story would have been too unwieldy. There were more than just the ones I mentioned. But despite all of this craziness, there were no ethics complaints. I mean, if you were getting the runaround by a lawyer like that, wouldn't you complain to somebody? I'm sure you would. And that's probably why some of you were screaming into your phone while you were listening to this story. Report the guy. Tell somebody. Why are these people just letting the lawyer jerk him around like this? It seems that the newspaper, the Los Angeles Times, had the same questions. And after the Edelson firm started the lawsuit and brought Girardi's bad acts to everyone's attention, the LA Times did some searching. They looked at the publicly available records of disciplinary violations, and they too found nothing against Girardi. From the day Tom Girardi was admitted to practice in California in 1965 until 2021, not a single public mention of any matter being investigated, filed, or disposed of. The LA Times reporters asked themselves, how could that possibly be? They wanted to dig deeper, so they asked the State Bar of California for more information. They wanted the non-public records that might exist. The State Bar refused to turn over those records, claiming that the information was confidential. So the LA Times sued. They filed a petition in the California Supreme Court asking the court to require the State Bar Disciplinary Board to disclose information it might have about Tom Girardi. The court ruled in favor of the newspaper and required the State Bar to turn over the info. The LA Times was shocked by what they found. Over the past 2 decades, there were over 200 ethics complaints filed against Tom Girardi, and they were all buried. Why? How? It leaves you speechless. Well, the LA Times conducted a months-long investigation and learned that Tom Girardi had been paying off ethics investigators at the State Bar of California for over 20 years. The LA Times found that there were inappropriate relationships between disciplinary officials and Tom Girardi. Some staffers received annual invitations to a Las Vegas legal conference where Girardi hosted over-the-top parties at the Wynn Casino featuring Jay Leno and other celebrity entertainers. When the State Bar of California saw that, it prompted them to commission a report on the situation, and they were horrified by what they found. It turns out that numerous State Bar officials with close ties to Girardi killed complaints that came into the agency or improperly closed cases about the lawyer's alleged misconduct. Several complaints were quietly closed by State Bar employees whose ties to the wealthy attorney tainted their decisions. There even appeared to be a bit of a cover-up. Two agency prosecutors who advocated taking action against Tom Girardi's law license were fired under questionable circumstances by top executives close to the lawyer. And then they found that Girardi forged a particularly tight relationship with one disciplinary investigator. Over the 15 years that the investigator worked at the bar, Girardi routinely treated him to pricey meals at expensive restaurants. The investigator rode on Girardi's private jet. Two of his children even got jobs at the law firm. When the investigator and his wife were sued by a contractor building their dream house, Girardi provided years of free legal work. Girardi even gave the investigator an Amex card that was paid for by the firm. For 7 years, the investigator charged an average of $45,000 per year on the card. Girardi also guaranteed a $150,000 bank loan to the investigator at the time when the investigator worked at the state bar. His law firm even made payments on that loan for several years. If that wasn't enough, Girardi's law firm leased 2 BMWs and a Cadillac Escalade for the investigator while he worked at the state bar and afterwards. The LA Times reported that Tom Girardi funneled more than $1 million in gifts and payments to that investigator and his wife. That's probably why the investigator selected Tom Girardi to be the godfather to one of his children. And as a 1990s hip-hop artist once said, but wait, it gets worse. Other state bar employees also secretly took gifts and perks from Girardi. One of those guys was a state bar disciplinary prosecutor, a guy who worked at the agency for more than 30 years. Girardi gifted the prosecutor with meals at restaurants, invitations to Girardi's Super Bowl, Christmas, and Thanksgiving parties, and tickets to concert performances by Adele and Santana. A Girardi Keese employee recalled that the prosecutor used to visit the law firm's office frequently for closed-door meetings with Girardi. Oh, so that was the consultant visiting the office, huh? That prosecutor just happened to oversee the intake department for complaints for years and was involved in closing several complaints against Girardi. According to the State Bar report, in one case he instructed a colleague to make it go away. Tom Girardi was indicted in January of 2023, and he was charged with 4 counts of wire fraud covering a 10-year period from 2010 to 2020. By that time, Girardi had been living in an assisted care facility. He had apparently developed Alzheimer's disease, and his lawyers claimed that it left him confused and unable to assist in his own defense. The judge found him fit to stand trial anyway. On August 27, 2024, the jury convicted Tom Girardi on all 4 counts after deliberating for just 4 hours. U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada said, quote, Tom Girardi built celebrity status and lured in his victims by falsely portraying himself as a champion of justice. In reality, he was a Robin Hood in reverse, stealing from the needy to support a lavish Hollywood lifestyle. Girardi wasn't the only one to go down. The firm's head of accounting pled guilty and was sentenced 2 years in prison. Girardi's son-in-law, who was a lawyer that worked in his office and helped secure the Lion Air settlement and then watched the money disappear, he pled guilty also and got 4 months in prison and 4 months of home confinement. And that associate who fielded desperate emails from the Indonesian widows asking where their money was, he also got jail time. On June 3, 2025, Tom Girardi's 86th birthday, a federal U.S. district judge sentenced him to 7 years and 3 months in federal prison. He surrendered to federal authorities in July of 2025. As for Erica Jane, she was sued by the bankruptcy trustee for $25 million. She claimed that she had no idea what her husband was doing behind the scenes. On May 22, 2026, just days before jury selection was set to begin, she settled. The terms are confidential, but the 5-year legal battle ended without a verdict and without a finding of liability. Erica Jane was never criminally charged, and on the day when her former husband was sentenced, she was in London preparing to perform at the Cocoa Club. As for the people who protected Girardi at the state bar, the 2 key people who protected him had been fired for entirely different reasons years before their involvement in the Girardi matter came to light. They were never charged for what they allegedly did for Tom Girardi. Nobody there went to prison. Nobody lost their law license. The institution issued reports. It acknowledged a shocking past culture of unacceptable behavior, It promised reform and moved on. The people of Hinckley, California watched their town turn into a ghost town. Joseph Ruigomez underwent 30 surgeries waiting for money that never came. Indonesian widows and orphans spent 8 months being lied to about funds that were already gone. And the system that was supposed to stop it all spent decades looking the other way. Tom Girardi is 86 years old, in a federal prison, and he claims that he doesn't remember any of it. Maybe he doesn't, but his victims remember everything. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to go to your podcast platform and follow the podcast and give us a rating, maybe even a wonderful review. That would be really nice as well. You know, I finish these off by saying to my daughter and my son, who both listen to the podcast, I tell them to drive carefully, and I love them. And what I found out recently is that my son is slacking off. He's not listening to the podcast as much. My daughter, absolutely. So while I want them to both drive carefully, and Haley and Ross, please drive carefully, while I obviously love both of my children, I just want you to know, Haley, I love you more. Oh, you have no idea how happy that just made her. Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye now.